Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Misconceptions. I am very grateful for to our guest presenter today, our guest conversation today with Sara Kohn. Sara, thank you so much for saying yes and agreeing to speak with me.
Thank you. This is such a special opportunity, and I think it's just a great conversation that needs to be had. So I'm very grateful to be able to be here and do it.
So, you and I've actually brought you in to speak with my students sometimes through the MSW program. We've talked about in our maternal mental health class, I've had you discuss this idea of mothering without a mother. And actually, I think if I remember correctly, you actually was in my coping with loss class. But the interplay between the two is so significant. And I think that that's what I wanted you to really be focused in on today. So, first and foremost, I need the world to know who is Rivkah Kohn and what is this incredible, very unique program that you created. And that is going to set the stage for this conversation. So tell us about yourself.
Okay, so thank you. I grew up in Muncie, and my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer when I was about two and a half and passed away when I was 9. So essentially, I grew up, just to lead into our later conversations, grew up essentially with a very, very sick mother who just had a boundless amount of energy. And so I kind of didn't grow up in a very dysfunctional house. I grew up in a very functional, but very, very ill mother. When I was 9 years old, my mother passed away, and I was an only child. So it was a little bit of a lonely journey in terms of trying to figure out my own loss. And so 18 years ago, almost 19 years ago, I founded this organization called Links. At the time, I actually thought I was just founding a magazine. The initial thing was Links Magazine, and that was my initial email address.
I remember
Um,
that magazine.
it still exists, and it's
Yeah.
incredible, and it's still a first line of defense for a lot of people who are not ready to talk about their grief, but would perhaps read it. And this was for teen girls who lost a parent, and eventually we branched into dealing with boys and dealing with children and dealing with young children. And right now, our organization services over 4,000 children over a year, from 0 to 23 who lost a parent. So that's
Whew.
the kind
Yeah.
of the piece. And I think just to segue into what our conversation is going to be, one of our mantras here is, like, we call it the forever thing. That once they get involved with us at the age of 14, they can call us back at 24 when they've had their first kid and say, hey, this isn't exactly what I thought it would be. And
Yeah.
so that's how we segued into this world, a little bit of mothering without a mother.
So talk to me a little bit. First of all, I want to just acknowledge, you know, the journey you put together in just like three sentences, holds so much weight and so much intensity. And I just want to take a moment to just acknowledge that, that moment of what it meant to lose a mother at a very young age, and to also at some point grow with that knowledge that you never really wanted to have, to do something so extraordinary and meaningful, but also still living without a mom. And I just want to acknowledge that in this minute. And maybe for the purpose of this conversation, if you would like to say your mother's name, either, I know for you it was probably mommy, but maybe you want to share her name with the world.
So for me, she was definitely mommy. But here's actually a very interesting thing. My mother was known to all her friends as Rosie. And when I named my daughter, I named her with her Hebrew name, which was Shoshana Miriam, actually. And people said to me, that must be so significant. You're naming after your mother. My mother was Rosie. I can't even connect that this name would hold that name. But yeah, that was it. Thank you
That's
for the
fantastic.
opportunity to share that.
So when one of the things I think about, even before a young woman becomes a mother, when she doesn't have her own mother, I think about just the emerging adulthood of what it means to become a young woman without a mother to mother her through those journeys. So maybe maybe if we can, just from the reproductive years, because I remember you talking to me about this and things that I had never really considered. But what is the experience like for a young woman that she does not have her mother? She's 10, she's 11, she's 12. Just take me a little bit through some of the reproductive journey of what it means to grow up without a mother in your life in the way that other young women might have one.
So I want to just say something, because I did get some pushback one time when I mentioned this. And that's to say that it doesn't mean that everybody who has a mother has all of the stuff that I'm mentioning. And I kind of want to hold space for that, because sometimes I say things of like, growing up without a mother, I didn't have XYZ. And people will say, well, a lot of mothers don't do that either. That could be true. And I want to just hold space for that and be able to now say, well, when a mother is physically not alive and cannot under any circumstances do it, what closes for a young adult, especially, is the possibility of hope. When you're dealing with a parent who perhaps is absentee or wasn't aware of education that her young daughter needed, the young child may still have hope of like, one day I'm going to explain this. And what closes out once a death happens is that they know that there's no opportunity for this. What we have found is that girls who don't have mothers during their early puberty years, like you said, that could be 10, 11, it could be 13, 15, depends, when they're emerging. What we have found is there's a lot of things that are uncomfortable for the women in their lives to talk about. So whereas an aunt might come to the play or the graduation party and a grandmother may take her shopping, suddenly comes to puberty and people shy away from it, whether consciously or unconsciously. For some people, it's just like, I'm not her mother. I shouldn't be coming into this territory. And then the question is, well, who should? Right?
Right.
Do you have another idea of somebody who should be doing this? Sometimes that's true. Like sometimes I spoke with a grandmother who's in her 80s who said, you don't want me doing this. And she's right. We didn't want her doing it because they didn't have that sort of relationship. And that wasn't a good idea. But then I said to her, because she was so close with her granddaughter, I said, who do you think is the right person? Your granddaughter, right? And we had to put that into place. Anyway, so going into that piece, I think is an important piece, is that a lot of them just kind of say, that's not for me, not for me, not for me. And so what the poor kid is left with is nobody. And I've met so many young adults who have told me, like, nobody ever told me about my periods. And nobody ever told me why my body was changing. I thought it was me. I thought I was broken, all those types of things. And that's so troubling because it forms the identity in such a distorted way. And then you'll have those who their fathers did the job, and some of them did a great job of it. I have to hand that to them. And some of them less so. And
Yeah.
understandably so. It isn't something that they're familiar with on a firsthand basis. So it's a little challenging with that. So what I find is there's an enormous amount of cluelessness. I take nothing for granted. Years ago, we did an event, and I didn't put this on the flyer, or trust me, the girls wouldn't have come, but we did an event for young adults. And you're talking about, this was, I think they were 20 to 25, single young adults. It was a beautiful event to talk about skincare, to talk about all sorts of things, especially as many of them were dating and were kind of facing different challenges. So it was great. We had someone who did laser hair removal, somebody else who was a facialist. We had all these different people coming to speak. And one of the women that I brought down is a woman who owns and sells in her store bras. And I really had her speak to the girls and the young women about fitting and about feeling comfortable and what should be okay in a store and what shouldn't be okay in a store. And the first few seconds, obviously, everybody was uncomfortable, right? Because they didn't know they were signing up for this.
Right.
And after that, the questions were just coming and not stopping. And it was both heartwarming and heartbreaking to listen to them, because these weren't little kids. These were women 20 to 25. And some of the questions they were asking, I was like, oh my goodness. So for 10 years, they thought this was it.
Right.
And she was so patient and kind in explaining it and being able to talk to them in such an affirmative and beautiful way. But it did very much open my eyes to the fact of sometimes just normal feminine stuff is really tough. And that does form the foundational work to where some of the struggles are later.
I hear it. I hear it. Okay. So as we move into, we're going to jump into, I guess, newly married life, but I think for the purpose of our conversation, let's talk about what it means to become pregnant and to become a mother. And what are you thinking about as these young women become this next, are entering this new stage of life? There's so much to talk about in that stage, but like, what are you thinking about?
So this is highly emotional for me, and I'm going to be totally transparent. My entire grief process began as I gave birth.
Mm.
I never touched my grief before that in a meaningful way. I was a very happy child, a very content teen, very much having my best life. And it didn't mean that my emotions were shut off. I was very much in touch. I just didn't know what the word grief meant. It certainly wasn't in the vocabulary back then. And I think for me, the birth was what brought it. And I know that I've heard this from so many, sorry about that. I know I've heard this from so many women, how they're so prepared that their wedding day is going to be so emotional and everything like that. And it's the birth, it's the pregnancy and the birth that does them in. So there are three struggles. One is just very practically, many of them don't have their mother's medical history, especially if
Mm,
they were very young. And that is huge because you come into a doctor and the doctor says, tell me a little bit about typical medical history. And blank.
they don't
And
know.
it makes so many women feel less than. It's like, oh my gosh, I should have known, I should have asked. And sometimes they aren't comfortable adults in their life that they could even ask. Some of these children, let's say, lost a parent to cancer and lost a mother to cancer. And the doctors will rightfully ask them what type of cancer was it. And I cannot tell you how many women have no clue. A
Right.
woman said to me she was 5 years old and when her mother passed away, and there was nothing that she was told. And unfortunately, by the time she was 21 and pregnant, there was nobody alive, even within the circle. Her mother had one brother and whatever it was. Her grandmother had dementia. Like there was nobody for her to even ask, and she was lost with that. And there's just so much medically that gets lost in the process. So that's one. And then there is another practical element is we're used to, especially in our community, pregnancy, birth, women are supported by other women in their family. Again, this isn't true for everybody, and I don't want to make this blanket statement like everybody gets this piece and they don't. But there is definitely a heightened sense of loss when people say, oh, my mother should be here to teach me how to do this. How do you swaddle a
Sure.
baby? How do you
Right.
hold a baby like this? What happens when a baby just did I cry for hours and hours and hours? And then it brings with it, now I'm going to go to the emotional, a whole new wave of grief. You're holding this child and you're a mother. And suddenly you understand death from your mother's perspective.
Mm,
My mother left this. And there is so much that comes along with that, that is just, most women are completely not prepared for, especially
mm,
if they've been through so many milestones. I have people who tell me most of my life I've been living without my mother. I didn't expect this to hit me in birth one, birth two. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, all of this is here. And I think that that's something that's sort of surprising to them oftentimes.
I think that's so fascinating. I just have to share that when you said that third thing, kind of like caught my breath because, I think about what many women have experienced over this last year and a half since October 7th. And many of us, like, I think for me, what kept catching in my throat was the feeling of the mother of any of these hostages, right? And knowing what that, I think the being a mother was what resonated more than anything else over this last year and a half. Like the internal pain and anguish, obviously we cannot compare and cannot measure, but that's where I think many women really connected with the mothers of the hostages, the Rachel Goldbergs among us,
Mhm.
that idea of like, we can align so differently for those with those who are mothers as well. And so
Yes.
then to see that perspective from the adult view is something very new and unique for a woman who's now mothering without her own. Very, very powerful. When we think about, I think about also like the idea of like who affirms for us that we're doing a good job, right? Who affirms for us this is normal, this is abnormal, or just in general, like you're doing great. Even if she's
Mm-hmm.
not always the most supportive voice, there's a big part of it that hopefully is supportive, right? What are you hearing from these young women when it comes to like the parenting, the normal parenting journey of figuring this stuff out? What are they expressing?
A lot of confusion and a lot of shame. There's this feeling that everybody else knows what they're doing, or people with mothers know what they're doing. And it's obviously that's not necessarily the case. But for a lot of us, there's this feeling of inadequacy. I'll never forget, I brought my baby home, and the doctor said to me on the way home, he says, after 3 days, you should clean the stump and everything like that. And after that, you should really give her back. And I remember coming home and looking at my husband and saying, I can't bathe this thing. And I drop her in the bath. Like,
Right,
no, I'm
right,
not big enough to do that. Right.
right.
And I remember that my husband said, oh, I'll ask my mother to do it, or, whatever. And we asked her and she was laughing. She's like, no, the last baby I had was like 13 years. I'm not up for it. I remember looking around and saying, who's the adult in this room?
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
feeling like had my mother been there, it would have been natural for me to say, I don't know, let me watch you. Like I'm supposed to
Yeah.
learn how to do this thing from somebody who's done it before. And I think that that's with that comes tremendous amount of shame sometimes for women. Most of the time they don't speak it.
Yeah.
Because if they would speak it, of course they would hear that every one of us has been through a journey of learning how to do this stuff and making a whole lot of mistakes. And Baruch Hashem, our kids are okay. It's okay if they had the bath on day 5 and nobody knew what to do till then. Nothing happened, right? And every woman feels like this some level of inadequacy because this is new.
Sure.
But but so often those without mothers kind of have this heightened sense of like, I shouldn't say anything because I'm clearly crazy.
Hmm. So it's not like
Um,
I don't feel like being vulnerable. And it's interesting because I would have thought about it as like, I don't want to be vulnerable with somebody and ask for help because shouldn't they be offering me? Like, meaning there's nobody to ask necessarily.
so it could be. That's not what I hear most of the time. What I hear from women is more like, especially when it comes out later, where they'll say, I was so crazy. Like, why did I hold this in for five
Mm,
years only to find out when my next sister in law had a baby that she felt all the same way? And I was like, oh, so it wasn't just me. Right. Um, so I think there is a factor, and that is for women who lost a mother, they will often grow up what people call very strong.
yeah.
And they will learn how to do everything by themselves. So you have 10-year-olds who are packing their 6-year-old sister's lunches and
Right.
becoming mommy of the house and whatever it is. And so they believe that in this too, they can do everything by themselves. Asking for help and that sense of vulnerability is so foreign to them. It's
Mm,
so foreign to so many of these women because they really have done so many things on their own. I mean, I hear from women who say, I married myself off. I did everything.
right.
I set up
Right.
my apartment. I shopped for myself. Like, shouldn't I be able to do this mothering thing on our own as well? And when I tell them mothering is communal, it is not meant to be done on its own. It cannot be done on its own. Um, that's a whole different animal.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really interesting to think about. Also, like the idea of I'm supposed to do it on my own, right? It's not just like I have no choice, but I'm actually supposed to at this point. Like this is how I've been for so long. Then this is just part of that story, continuing on that
Mm-hmm.
story.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I'm wondering though, then when you think about the approach from a communal perspective, so it's one thing to say, well, I'm a part of an organization, the organization is going to help me. You know, my links buddy, my links mentor is going to come and do this with me. But I'm also thinking like communally, what is our place? Like, what is our role when there is someone in our neighborhood, friend, family system that does not have a mother? Um,
Mm-hmm.
what is that? Where is their opportunity, but also where are the kind of landmines that we need to be a little bit concerned about when approaching someone who's emerging into parenthood?
So that's a little bit tricky because it very much depends. I don't have to tell you like everything else in life. It depends on the person. And it
Sure.
depends what your relationship is like with the person. You know, in an ideal world, we're doing this for every woman who gives birth. We're being supportive
Right?
neighbors and friends, and we're cooking meals, and we're taking in kids, and we're just sitting with a woman and just sitting with her for a half hour. I always say this. I said, I had one woman in the neighborhood come into my home when I was holding my baby and feeling completely helpless. And I just want to point out, my husband was 100 times more skilled than I was because he had grown up around babies. I hadn't. So I put everything on him. And I always say everything I learned about babyhood and mothering was from him. But it was not the same as having another woman. And in a weird way, that was like a kind of a weird twist of like, oh, there's something like weird here. Like, why do I need him to teach me about this? Like, shouldn't this be instinctive? I had a woman in the neighborhood stop by with like cake, right? And said, hey, I'm bringing over cake to you. You just had a baby, which is a completely natural excuse to enter somebody's domain, right? Not like, hi, I'm here to check up if you're functioning, which
Right.
would probably be the wrong way to do it, right? And then come in and say, how are you doing? How's baby? Right? And and even just the compliments of just looking at a baby and saying, my goodness, this is a cute baby. You look like you're doing a great job with this baby. Something that would probably open the opportunity that if they do feel close enough and comfortable with this person to say, really, you think so? Because this kid was up screaming for 2 hours after I finished my last feed, and I'm wondering if I'm doing it right. And then, boom, you have that mothering connection. And if the person's not comfortable, they may say, oh, thank you. And they'll feel a little bit more like confident in whatever they're doing. So either way, You're not
Right.
doing anything wrong, except whatever the person's going to say. Not like, "Ooh, I'm so sorry. It doesn't look like you're doing very well."
Sure.
That would probably
Right.
not be the right way to go about it.
Right.
But I feel like we have so many excuses when people give birth to be part of their lives, whether it's a bris, a kiddush, stopping by with food. We're such a food-based community. Like
Always.
we have
Hmm.
all the excuses in the world. I'll never forget, I had a friend of mine, a friend of my mother's actually, after I had my twins, who were my second and third, she actually came and sent down to the hospital. I don't remember if she came in person or not, or if she sent it with someone, like a breakfast for me in the hospital. And she actually had the guts to write a note. I know this is something your mother would have done. Now that was because
Oh,
she was my
wow.
mother's
Yeah.
best friend, and she genuinely knew that my mother would have done that. And I always laugh. I say the story is that I was starving after I gave birth to my twins, and it was in Cornell was then in this new thing. You had to get out of bed to go get breakfast, which was about the stupidest thing. I couldn't do it.
Oh my.
And they were trying this whole new thing that they decided would be better for women. I love it. I love when executives plan something that works better for the budget and say it's better for the women. But anyway, so I didn't know that. So, because my last baby, that hadn't happened. So by the time I came out, they had pulled away the carts. I was starving.
Oh my.
And then literally, that's when I remember crying in my bed and saying, if my mother was alive, I would have had food. Now, would
Right.
I? Could be not. But
Right.
that's how grief works. Like in that moment, that's when we feel like, oh, this would have solved all of it. So getting that from her was like an extra dose of love.
Yeah. Well, can you tell me about, I want to hear a bit more about when you say it's the first time you touch that grief. If you don't mind sharing your own personal experience of what did that mean for you when you said it's the first time you approached grief and it was quite a number of years later, meaning you
Oh,
lost
yeah.
her at 9,
For me, it was
right?
about 12, 13 years later.
Hmm.
Um, I think what happened was that obviously we grow as humans. So obviously my brain and my mind and emotions were not in the same place as they were when I was 15 or 14 or 19 even, right? Each time we grow and each stage of life brings with it something different. So like I said, I was never shy to say my mother passed away. I was never shy to say it's yard site. Like it wasn't like I grew up in a mentality where like, let's not talk about it. But I think I went up to a point. I think
Hmm.
there was a part of me, not consciously, that just totally wasn't feeling that grief in a deeply consuming way. Mostly because at 9, 10, 11, I wasn't developmentally ready for it. And by the time I was developmentally ready for it, there wasn't necessarily the trigger nor the language to kind of bring that fully on. What birth did was do that. That's
Hmm.
what it did for me. It was like all of a sudden I was in this place where I was vulnerable physically, right? So that took down some levels of some walls. And emotionally, it was something nobody prepared me for, and nobody could have prepared me for. There's nothing that prepares you for that moment that they put a child in your arms and you're like, oh my goodness. It's a lot. That emotion, I would say the first couple of hours, it was just euphoria. And then after that, it was like this deep longing
Mm.
in a way that I had never felt before to share this with my mother. It was
Mm.
like, could we come down for a day and say, for just one day, I want you to just look at this new grandkid. I want you to know that I was okay. I want you to know that I managed all these years, that I'm now here to tell the tale, and that here's this beautiful baby. And my baby happened to have had really long eyelashes, which was exactly what my mother had. And it was like, Ma, look. And that moment came with such a searing pain of the realization of what I had lost and what I was never going to have. And it was a wave of grief that was intense, and it was just a lot. And the problem is that I didn't have the language.
Right.
Like again, I felt like every other milestone people had prepared me for. My wedding, everybody overhyped. My wedding, I didn't care that my mother wasn't there because I was having such a good time and such a good day and such a good everything that I was like, I don't know what everybody's talking to. But part of the reason that it didn't hit me as hard then I realized afterwards, there was all this talk about it. By the time you finish talking about it and you come to the actual day, you're like, I can do this. This is not so bad. And when those feelings came up, I knew what to do with it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to do it like this, like that. Here it was like, I was over the grief. I was now an adult, becoming a mother. Like nobody thought to sit me down, not a doula, not a doctor who knew my history, nothing, to say, hey, I just want you to know a lot of women who've lost mothers, you don't have to say has to or always or any of those things, but a lot of women feel the following, right? Just plant it as an idea. And then all of a sudden, that's not so scary and I'm not crazy.
Right.
And that would already mitigate half of the struggle. What nobody prepared me for was that I thought I did this once. Okay, I'm good. When my twins were born, it was like, again, the same thing all over again. And there it was
Mm,
tinged with the hunger. So that was the cover story at that point. But it was like, I was desperate for my mother to buy stuff, to be in it, to be part of it. Like it was just, there was every moment there. Interestingly, with my third birth, which was my fourth child, I can't say I felt it in the same way, but also because, separate story, I had dealt with so much after these other two births and needed to explore so much more emotionally. I was emotionally in a much better place. So
right.
I think, again, I just was coming at this from such a different perspective that I was able to handle all those feelings.
And you knew they were coming. Like you
Right.
anticipated them. You would have expected if you hadn't had to
So
birth
I
one,
think
birth
here's the
two.
weird part. Like after the first one, like I said, I don't think I anticipated it happening again for, yeah, because we're humans and we don't anticipate
Sure.
these things.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
but but I think, yeah, I think kind of after it happening twice, there was a part of me that was just like, oh, that might come up again.
Hmm. I'm
And like
wondering
I
if
said,
you, yeah, do you think about like what comes next in your life where that grief will show up again?
oh yeah,
Because even,
oh yeah.
because no matter what's done, it's still there. It's not over or done with, right? So where do you imagine it coming up or where has it shown up again?
Came up as my daughter turned 9.
Mm,
That child is now 19. But when she turned 9, I knew at that point I had been doing links for about 10 years. I'd read all Hope Edelman's stuff. I was like the most well versed motherless mother there is, right? So I completely knew about this thing that when children hit the same age you are as a mother, a lot you can be flooded with grief emotions, all good. Anyway, she asked me, I'll never forget the moment. She asked me to pack up something in her briefcase. And I remember looking at her and saying, like, you're a big kid. You could do this on your own. And her getting really upset with me, like disproportionately so. And I remember going into therapy that week and saying, like, I'm having such a hard time with my kid. She's really like being so dramatic about all these different things that she needs me to do. And I don't know, at her age, I did all this. And my therapist said, could you just listen to yourself for a second?
yeah.
She's like, of course you did this all on your own. You didn't have a mother. 9 year olds are not meant to do this. And with that came the flood of she's so little.
Right. Right.
I was so little. Like it was huge. I had it when I made bar mitzvah, which was my first big simcha, I would say. That I all of a sudden was just like, but there, interestingly, I would still say it was less than my births.
Mm, mm.
Again, because I was more prepared for it and because it was just different. It was just different. I came at it from a place of like, it was obviously going to be that mixed bag of emotions and stuff like that, but it was more happiness than actual grief. Like, it was more like, oh, this would have been so nice.
Sure.
Amy
Sure.
missed it. Like
Yeah.
that. That was more of where it was at.
And what do you think about for the future? What do you anticipate the future holding?
So it's
Like, does your
interesting.
mind go there? Like, do you
Oh
think
yeah.
about,
Oh
yeah,
yeah. Oh yeah. But I think in a much more pragmatic way. Like I think my brain is not necessarily I can't the same way I couldn't have pictured the emotions I had. I don't think I can really I don't think I'm being real if I say like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what feelings are that are going to come up. But I anticipate that when when I marry off a child or when I'm with my own daughter, not with her, but after she gives birth or anything of that sort, um, I think that'll bring up a lot. I think that'll bring up a lot
yeah,
of comparisons in my head, which I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing, but they're
yeah,
there. They're real. It's like, oh my gosh, look at what she has in the best possible way. And I want to be there and I want to do that. I have friends of mine who've helped their daughters after birth. And I remember looking at it and saying, like, there's a part of me that can't wait to do that and can't wait to be in that position. And there's a part of me that's just like, that's going to come with its own little something.
sure,
But
sure.
I think that over the years and being able to explore the grief as I mothered because it will come up at every corner that you least expect it. Um, I think that I've flexed that muscle a lot. I've
Yeah.
worked out that muscle, and I think to some degree it will be easier. Or maybe
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
deluding myself.
no, I think you're just so insightful. And I think also what you're also acknowledging is that, that it's okay to ask for help and not to just, kind of meander your way or weather your way through it, right? Like it's something that I love that you can openly say, well, I went to therapy and I, filled in the blank and I filled in this void in a way of like, I paid attention to it. You never fill the void, but that you're paid attention to the void.
So I want to just say something to that because I think that's something that I forgot to mention, and I think it's something so important. I have like 10 mothers, and I really think that that's important. Like, if you don't have a mother, you're never going to find that one person that will fill all of it, right? It's normal for me that I have one woman that I like, if my kid has this weird rash, like, she's the person I'm going to ask. Like, you're smarter than Google. You've had the 9 kids. Tell me what in the world this rash is. Like, tell me if I need to really worry about it or not, right?
Right.
One type of person. Then there's sometimes people that I'm like exploring more of like ideas and ideals, if you will, as a parent. And then there's therapy where it's like everything is so messy. Like, why? Right.
Right.
And for me, it's been an important part of my journey to be able to have all of that and to be able to know where my challenges are, where I'm being flooded, where it's too overwhelming for me sometimes, certain parts of the parenting piece where I sometimes need to be able to say, I need to offload this part
Yeah. Yeah.
a little bit. But I think having multiple mothers in a strange way is something we've sometimes, like, I certainly have sometimes needed very much in my life, to just be able to help me through it.
And I have to acknowledge, I think we all need them. Even those of us that still are blessed with our mothers, like we still need other ones too, right? I have to also think I'm wondering how you pushed past, unless you didn't feel this way, but you described this idea of like this shame that can come along that you hear a lot, right? The shame of, I should know how to do this, right? Tell me how you push past that in your own brain to be like, yeah, okay, I don't. So therefore, I'm going to call this woman and this mom and this grandmother and this bubby. How did you push past that in your own head?
I think I pushed past it way too late in the game, being
Mm.
honest. I struggled a lot after my first 2 children, whether it was with postpartum anxiety, which I'm very open about, whether it was with just this feeling of complete inadequacy, like I said, and a lot of shame, which made me shut down and shut down and shut down more and more and more and retreat more into myself. Um, Eventually, I made my way to therapy. And eventually, I think through hearing my therapist reflect certain things as normal, been there, done that, or that doesn't mean anything, and completely not say to me, oh, no, that's not it, but more in the line of questioning or in the line of conversation, opening me up to like, oh, wait, like maybe that's not something terrible, or maybe that's not something I should be concerned about or anything of that sort. Um, and I think it's been a lifelong process. I think there will always be some parts of me that will question, doubt, wonder.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of the territory. Like that's part of what I've had to accept is just going to be the forever piece of a little 9-year-old in me that looks around the world and says, oh, I wore weird clothes because there was no woman who said, don't wear that. So
Yeah.
maybe now I'm also doing something strange and nobody's stopping me. Right.
Mm, mm.
You get over that real fast once you have teens because they stop you from doing anything they consider embarrassing and they
Truth,
embarrass you further.
truth,
So at this
truth.
point, I'm good. I'm in a really good place because I have 3 people who make sure that I never do anything too awful. I mean, being on this
Or to
podcast probably
embarrass
is
them. Right.
embarrassing. Yeah, I
Right.
mean,
Of
whatever,
course.
all good. But point being is that yes, I think it's. I don't want to shortchange anybody and say like, yeah, I came to this gorgeous epiphany one moment. I think it's lifelong, and I think it's something that, to some degree, I will forever struggle with in different pieces. And not but, and it was something that I've become significantly better at through therapy.
Yeah.
There's no other way for me personally. And again, sometimes
Yeah.
I just look around the world and I become a people watcher and I just say like, ah, yeah, I guess that's what everybody does. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes I see other mothers and I just feel like going home to them and saying, like, I've been there. You're okay.
Right, right, exactly, exactly. I think I appreciate also this, what you just said about this idea that this is a lifelong experience. It's not something that you could be like, I did that grief. I've acknowledged what happened. Like I'm in this place now and I never look backwards and the forwards doesn't hold this. Like the idea of mothering without a mother and living without a mother is something that your future really is different than someone who will have that opportunity for more years. And I just have to put one kind of pin in this conversation to say that for one of the things we know is a risk factor for someone developing postpartum depression, anxiety, et cetera, is actually being in an immediate loss of like having an immediate grief experience. So losing a mother, having a recent loss is going to be something that really can contribute to the development of a perinatal mood disorder. But I think what you're also reminding me and others that are listening that don't throw it all into the PMAD category. Meaning, if this person is potentially re-grieving something that really needs to be acknowledged and listened to, not just seen as diagnostic. And I think that's an important thing to remember. So, in the last couple minutes that we have together, I'd love for you to throw out a few misconceptions that people may have about motherhood, mothering without a mother. What are some of those misconceptions that you want people to understand?
So I think the first misconception is that for a lot of people who've been supporting young children and teens as they lost a parent, whether that's nieces or cousins or neighbors, there's this feeling of we married them off and now they're good.
Ah,
And I just kind of want to put it out there is that, like I said, it's lifelong. Check in when they're making simchas, check in when they're having babies, check in and be there as a support because the chances it are that this grief is coming up in a different form for them and they could use the support. And sometimes we just imagine that at this point they're good.
they're
So
good.
that's
And can I
misconception.
add that they may not have the language to express what they're
Yes.
feeling yet?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think sometimes just by checking in and just by being there, you're being the support that you were way back then.
Right.
That's probably the biggest misconception. And I think sometimes if people feel like people are surrounded, like I have a friend of mine who her mother had 10 sisters. So everybody imagined that one of the 10 sisters was doing the job of supporting this young mother who actually lost her mother in early part of her pregnancy. And yet nobody was because
Mm.
everybody thought somebody else was. So don't make assumptions. And if you feel there's a need for support in any capacity and that you can be that for somebody, then do it. Just do it because
Yeah.
they need it. And whatever can be done in the most supportive way and in the most respectful way, obviously, because we don't want to enter people's spaces where we don't belong, but being able to be there and supporting women who are dealing with both a beautiful moment and kind of tinged with a little bit of sadness and a little bit of pain. It's something incredible if you can do that.
Wow. Is there a program within Link specifically for new mothering? Tell us about it.
So there's something actually called Cradle. It's a beautiful program that we've partnered with. And they do a week of a baby nurse or a week at a Kindergarten for all of our women
Which is a
who've
a
lost
respite
either,
home for new moms.
yes, who've lost either parent and are having babies one, two, or three, which I thought was
Uh,
very generous. And then they also deliver a beautiful layout package with it. And it's just a way of saying hi. We're actually looking into doing a little bit of classes for our women and being able to just talk about these types of topics.
Oh, so important. I feel like that's the opportunity here, like this discussion, the ability to talk about these things. If you're a therapist listening to the podcast, if you're just a community member, listening to this podcast, that maybe it'll just give you like an extra breath, an extra moment of saying, wait, I really never considered that, right? Like I have to admit, I have to acknowledge that I was raised by a mother who lost her mother when she was 25. And, if my mother hears me saying this, she'll be like, why'd you talk about me? And because I think that it does. We always think about my siblings, and I always think about like, what must that have been like for her? And how might our lives have been different if my mother had had the opportunity of raising her children with her mother? And she actually also lost her mom when she was pregnant. So that story becomes generational. And
Mm-hmm.
for the good and for the bad, it is a generational experience. And so I think the more we are just broadening awareness and conversation, the greater likelihood that there'll be like a pause and say, wow, this holds impact. And I'm grateful for you leading the conversation and really leading the charge on this exceptional initiative. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here.
It's a pleasure.